Hey, everybody, this is Chris
and Cathy
from Petability Podcast. We wanted to take a minute to thank you all for tuning in. We appreciate every listener and are grateful for this platform.
Please help us share our vision by subscribing to Petability Podcast through your favorite streaming app. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Petability Podcast and share our content on social media.
You can also support the show by making a donation. Simply go to our website at petabilitypodcast.buzzsprout.com and click on the heart symbol at the top of the page. Thanks for listening.
We hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to Petability. I'm your host, Cathy Simons.
And I'm your host, Chris Cranston. Our podcast provides interviews and information to help your pets live their best lives. Good morning. Good morning.
Wow, Chris, you're on fire. Good morning. How are you?
It's funny you say that I'm on fire because I've been preaching that lately. I'm like, I am on fire. I'm just trying to be really productive. It's fall, so I'm into a little nesting mode. And
nice. Good for you.
Yes, purging, organizing.
I love the fall in New England. It's like my favorite time. And I feel like you're right. It's a time to like purge and clean and nest and get ready for the holidays.
It's right around the corner.
Around the corner. So you got anything you want to share today, Chris? You got anything on your...
Well, no, Cathy.
Want to share with the audience? You know what? I have a share. This is a really good feel-good moment for me because I had someone reach out to me via Instagram about her blind dog. And as you know, that's my jam. I like to talk a lot about living with blind dogs and dogs with not only physical impairments, but of course, sensory impairments, since I've had 2 blind dogs now. And she was just looking for a few ideas about her dog, had lost her vision, but she was really worried about this dog. And she said, I just need to hear a few words of encouragement. So I sent her off a little message, about the dog and my thoughts and so forth. And, she was keeping me updated about the dog as the dog went along. But I got tagged in some videos the other day of the dog at the beach, running with her friends, running in and out of the water, playing in the waves.
Wow.
Like, yes.
So like a completely blind dog is not afraid to That's crazy. My dogs are afraid of the waves and they're fully sighted.
So she may have some vision. It's limited, but she was doing just fine. And it just made me feel really good because, I love to see dogs, any dog or any pet living their best life. But of course, blind dogs are my fave.
So over what period of time was that? Like since she lost her vision and then was back at the beach?
Like 3 weeks.
Wow.
She's a brave little dog and her mom is doing a great job with her. So, and everybody's dog has got a different time frame, right? Everybody's an individual and every dog has a different time frame. That was just that dog's time frame. And I think being with the other dogs was, encouraging for her. That was it. She went in the waves.
C'est la vie. Well, that's a great story to start out with. And today we have a great topic to discuss that I cannot believe we haven't talked about to date.
I know. And actually, I'm going to give it away. We're going to talk about stretching. And as we're talking, I'm stretching right now. I'm stretching my arm and my shoulder, right? Because this is what all good athletes will do, right?
But stretching isn't just for athletes. It's a daily practice.
I know. You're absolutely right, Chris. You don't have to be an athlete to stretch. But as I've said before, our dogs, no matter what age, no matter what stage of their lives, they are athletes because they perform feats of athleticism every day. Stair climbing, walking, running, playing, and have I'm sure you've all seen this. When your dog gets up first thing in the morning, what do, Chris?
Stretch. We've even named things like in yoga, right? Upward dog and downward dog, because our pets are really smart. They're smarter than people in a lot of ways in terms of taking care of their own bodies.
Right.
And cats, especially. Every time a cat gets up, they stretch and maneuver and so forth. And I would often use that analogy when I was working with people. For those of you who don't know, I was formerly a physical therapist for people. And I'd say, look at our animals, look at our cats. Every time they get up, they stretch. And we should be doing something similar. So Cathy, like our dogs that you say are performing feats of athleticism on a daily basis, I like to think of myself in a similar manner. And I do have a stretching routine that I do on a regular basis in the shower every day. Mm-hmm. Well, that is assuming that I shower every day.
Yes, assuming. But the warm water is helpful with the stretching. Yeah, yeah. I have a stretching routine that I use prior to seeing patients on my work day. So I'll stretch it out, my shoulder particularly, and my back particularly, before I get going.
Yeah.
Well, maybe what we can do, Chris, for the audience is, can you describe what stretching is for the audience if they're not familiar with what stretching really means?
So my understanding of stretching is that we're elongating the soft tissues, and that can be done either actively or passively. Today, we're going to focus on passive stretching, but maybe at the end we'll throw in a few ways that we might be able to facilitate some active stretching in our pets. But we have a normal resting length of muscles, right? And so it's just kind of this neutral position. And when we maneuver our bodies in a way that takes them beyond that neutral resting position, it can be a stretch. And I also want to emphasize that stretching isn't just muscles. I said soft tissues earlier, and that includes a lot of other types of tissues within our body. So the tendons that hook the muscles to the bone, the ligaments that hook bone to bone, as well as the joint capsules or the fibrous tissue around the joints. So all of those get stretched and elongated depending on the position that we're in or we put our pet in. And each one of those tissues has a different receptiveness, if you will, or stretchability. So, for example, muscles have a lot of elastin in the tissue. And so, as the name implies, it's very elastic. So it can stretch out more readily than a ligament, for example, which is much less elastic and stiffer. So an analogy I use with muscles is that, I'll tell people, imagine a rubber band, which is also very elastic. Mm-hmm. And, if you stretch it back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, it remains that original size. But if you take that rubber band and you put tension on it, as if you would a muscle that's being stretched, and you hold it for a period of time, let's say, for example, 30 seconds, because that's what we recommend for our muscles, that rubber band oftentimes will be bigger. It's a larger diameter because you've held that. And that's a key point too, because the muscles do not respond to a quick stretch. And that can actually be dangerous and
painful.
injurious.
It can be painful. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's a slow, progressive holding. It's really the length of time that you're holding it at that tension point, as opposed to how aggressive you are with this stretch. In fact, you don't want to be aggressive. You want to be very gentle. Go to that point of tension and then hold it there.
Right. And this all prepares the body really for movement, right? I mean, one of the goals of stretching is that we don't want to injure ourselves. So like you said, that quick stretch, painful, can be damaging to tissue, but that nice, gentle stretch and holding it is preparing the tissues to get ready to go from maybe sedentary to actual movement and mobility.
Activity.
Right? Activity.
Yeah.
And that's going to help us to prevent injury as well, right? So it's going to get our body ready to move, and it's going to help us to prevent injury.
Right. So stretching is vital for mobility and ultimately independence. So.
Oh yeah. And I think it's really, important for every animal, of course, for our dogs and our cats, and for, anybody else who stretches. I know my guinea pig stretches sometimes, and that's pretty cool.
I think a lot of animals,
I think they do. I think a lot of animals do stretch. So it's important for their mobility, but also I think that, in my stretching thoughts, I think about senior dogs in particular, because those dogs oftentimes what clients will come in and tell me the dog is having trouble with mobility, and there really isn't an injury or a diagnosis. They're just having some trouble. And then once I've gotten to a point where I've increased their flexibility, that those dogs will now start doing things that they haven't done in a long time, including getting up and stretching. And what owners will tell me is, I didn't notice my dog wasn't stretching until they started stretching again.
Right.
So I think it's important for all animals. I like to, emphasize for our senior dogs that how important it is, because without injury, or some type of pathology, just losing that flexibility is limiting for them.
Yes. Yes. And I will tell people, to watch, maybe as a preventative thing, instead of in hindsight, notice if your dog stops doing their regular stretching routine, because that could be a barometer that indicates that there is some sort of injury or stiffness or what have you. So oftentimes, as you said, that our pets will lose flexibility as a result of aging or injury, and then they become less likely to stretch on their own. So at that point, we come in and become their surrogate stretchers, right? We have to stretch for them. And then once we facilitate that process, then like you said, they may go back to stretching on their own very readily. So,
Right.
Yep. So conversely, what happens when we don't stretch is that, the tissues shorten, they become tight. And then when they're called upon to be exercised, they're then weak and unable to extend fully. And that's what puts your pet at increased risk for joint pain, strains, and sprains. Stretching also helps with balance. So I often tell people that, like you said, with these elderly dogs or maybe neurologically impaired dogs, if they don't have proper flexibility and they fall, they're much more likely to injure themselves, because think about us. What do? If we're going to fall, we reach out our arm suddenly, to break our fall. And, our pets do the same thing. So if they're all bound and tight and not going in that range of motion, then, suddenly, there's a quick stretch implied, they can certainly, injure themselves. So,
and all of those things are the flexibility is needed just for daily living. Get up, move to your food bowl, get up, get on the couch, go down the stairs, go up the stairs. Go for your walk. It all applies to their daily living and their daily quality of life.
Right. Because if you videotape your pet doing some of these daily activities, I think you'll be shocked at the amount of motion that's needed to do these ostensibly simple activities. So if they don't have enough openness, for lack of a better word, extension of their hip to jump easily up on the couch, they're going to substitute something else and, perhaps injure their ankle or their back to make up for that compensation. Yep. So let's go back to, talking about the proper ways to stretch and ensuring that the pet is warm before we do the stretch. So what are some ways we can warm up our pets?
This might be a good time to plug our warm up and cool down podcast, because there's so much information on there and it's one of my favorites. But we can talk about some of the warm ups we could do here that are very simple, right? Just getting your dog up and moving. Sometimes I have my dog get up and move, and I'll do a few sit to stands with him. We'll do a few figure eights. We'll do a few, walking, jogging, whatever in the house just for a few minutes, right? It's simple. I'm going to mimic what I'm going to do with my dog. So we're going to go for a walk. So I get up and I move them.
Yep. Yeah. Like you said, just getting the blood flowing through activity, so it can be a walk, a short bout of exercise, but the goal is to promote circulation and to increase the temperature of the tissue a little bit. So elevating that tissue temperature helps to prevent potential injury as well. And and prevent overstretching, those.
Exactly. The warm up is key to the stretching. You want to move first, then do your stretching.
Right. And that is counterintuitive, because in the old days, we used to say, oh, we need to stretch. I remember my days in high school before, going out on the basketball court, we'd all go on the gym floor and sit down and, do hamstring stretches and so forth. And mounting research has showed that it's actually the opposite. We want to do a little movement first and then stretch after.
Right.
So it makes those tissues more pliable, more amenable to change, and so forth.
Oh yeah, oxygen flow, tissue temperatures warm up. You're getting ready to do something. Right. You're getting ready to move.
Yeah, and then another way that we could warm up a tissue. Let's say there was a specific strain in a muscle and it was very tight, like the dog's hamstring, for example. We could apply a little heat to that. A little microwavable hot pack.
Yep.
And that would also, work to increase the tissue temperature and promote circulation and so forth. So that would be more precise, I guess, over a specific muscle group, if you would.
More targeted. Yeah.
Targeted.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So now we've gotten our dog up, Chris, and we've moved around and we've done a few exercises. Let's say we did we figure 8 around the chairs, and we did a few sit to stands, and we did a little bit of moving. What comes next? What's the next step?
Well, then you want to have your dog relax, preferably on their side in a comfortable position, on a bed, nothing too billowy because you need to be able to kind of move the limbs, but a place that's free of distractions, that's quiet, that they're comfortable being, maybe no other pets around to, cause mischief and so forth. And if you kind of practice doing it in the same place, dogs are creatures of habit in many ways. They get it. It's like, oh, time for stretchies. And, and they will oftentimes go over and just plunk themselves down and understand what's coming next because it feels good, right? So
it does. And it's special time with one-on-one special time, with your owner too. Right. So that's really appealing to the pet as well.
Yep. And then I guess you want to describe, what we're feeling, what we're looking for as we stretch our pets in their comfortable position once we've gotten their cooperation.
Yes. Once you've gotten buy-in, then you could probably start, with front limb or back limb. I typically start with back limb, Chris. I don't know where you start typically. And I like to position myself behind the dog when I'm getting ready to do some stretching as well. So typically I get myself placed behind the dog. I just feel like it's a little easier for me. And I feel like if the dog maybe wants to sit up, I'll, I can put my hand on them and relax them rather than coming over the body. Does that make sense? So I'm in a position of sort of maybe up against their back. Like they can feel me, they can feel that I'm close to them, they can feel that I'm touching them, but I'm also giving them the suggestion that, we're going to lay down here for a little bit.
And this is the beauty of, you'll figure out with your own pet what works best because I typically start in the front.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I get them, lying down and then I just start, kind of petting their head. And, this is another way to warm up our dogs is through some massage, right? So, getting in there, loosening the tissues, promoting blood flow and so forth. But I'll do a little massage and just kind of get them calmed down through their front end. And then since I'm there and can prevent them from popping up and being curious, as to what I may be doing in the back. Yeah, I tend to start in the front, but, to each his own, whatever works for you and your pet. I'm also on the back side, as you mentioned, because I think I have more control there. And, no matter what we're stretching, we want to be really, really in tune with what we're feeling and our pet's reactions.
Right.
So you're only going to push to that point where you feel that tension, that slight resistance, and then that's where you hold it. And remember earlier I said, you don't want to push aggressively. You don't want to go beyond that point. You just want to hold it there and you want to let the tissue respond. Yep. And as you feel it relaxing and stretching, you can then move with it slightly to continue that same amount of tissue for the duration, same amount of tension for the duration of the stretch.
And it almost feels, elasticy. It's hard for me to describe what it feels like. But maybe it's sort of a little bit of an elasticy feeling when you get to that end range. Yeah. And the other thing that you want to be careful of, you don't want to stretch it so much that you actually get a muscle contraction because that's uncomfortable. So if you're stretching it to the point where you're actually getting some contraction of the muscle, that you've gone a little too far.
Well, that means your pet is fighting you, right? And it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But I sometimes, it's just, we're not on the same page, me and the pet. Yeah. And so I may back off, massage again a little bit, readjust my hands, and then maybe use a little bit more caution, go a little bit more slowly and go back into it. And then, it's fine. A second. So I don't want our listeners to think, oh my gosh, if they pull back, because if they haven't experienced stretching like this before, they're going to be a little bit, I guess, protective sometimes and be like, what are you doing? This is foreign to me, but they'll learn to appreciate it over time, as long as you're following the rules of going slowly and monitoring your pet's response.
Right.
So, and those responses can be subtle. We've talked again about discomfort. It can certainly be, jerking the limb back, for example, but it could also be, getting a pinched look on their face, or holding their breath, or licking their lips, or
yawning, or any of those things can be signs of stress.
Yep. So I usually tell people to start out with just like 5 or 10 seconds. And then try to, over time, work up to the goal of 30 seconds per stretch.
Yeah.
And similarly, in terms of repetition, I'll say try to do, 1 or 2, and your goal is to perform 3 stretches of 30 seconds. If that tissue is a problem and tight. A lot of times I'm going through this routine, and I know for myself, doing my little shower routine, I've been doing it enough that it's like, I don't really feel it. But maybe after doing a hike or a stressful workout or whatever, I'm like, oh, wow, that's really tight again. Yeah. So I'll spend more time, working on the tissues that are tight. And then the other ones, I might just, do 1 stretch to kind of check in, make sure that it's still as pliant as it should be. Again, this is great for finding potential troubles before they occur.
Right. Yeah. And getting familiar with your pet's body, right? Not only that, check, not only finding out how far my dog can stretch or not stretch, or how much range of motion or lack of range of motion, but you can also find anything. You can find a lump, a bump, a cut, a scrape. Get familiar with your dog's body, what is right and what doesn't feel right.
Right. And we recently interviewed a friend of ours, Amy Hesbach, who was talking about neuroplasticity. And, the huge take-home message that I got through that chat with her was, we need to really encourage people to lay their hands on their pets. For so many reasons. There's so many benefits. So tune into that podcast too, because it was very enlightening.
Why don't we talk about the mechanics of stretching? Because we're going to be talking today about stretching some of the major muscle groups.
Right. These are some basic stretches that I think everybody should be familiar with. And, some of the things that we don't cover today, I recommend, leaving to the experts. And, if your dog has a particular problem that your veterinarian or physical rehab person or other veterinary professional may instruct in a specific stretch for your pet. But these are designed for healthy dogs, even cats, to be performed again on a regular basis to prevent injury and keep them as healthy and mobile as possible.
Right. All right. Why don't we start with the front limb, since we were just talking about the front limb?
Sure. So the muscle group that I find to be the tightest in all the dogs that I treat is what I call the triceps, but you're actually getting a lot of different, as I mentioned earlier, tissues and other muscles with it.
Of course.
But we're going to just think about it, as the triceps. It's on the back of your pet's forelimb, the front leg, just like it's on the back of our arm. And because dogs are quadruped, they are engaging that triceps a lot whenever they are weight bearing. And that can include, not just running and walking, but, certainly jumping, stairs, sitting, standing. So even statically, that muscle is contracting to prevent that elbow from collapsing. So it extends the elbow and also crosses the shoulder joint and acts as a shoulder stabilizer. So
it's a major muscle group for dogs. And I absolutely agree that this is probably the tightest area. And I'm thinking, as you're talking about it now, I'm just like picturing a dog walking and then trotting and then running, and how engaged those triceps are in stabilizing the dog when they're moving. So it's kind of a really important, it's kind of a big deal.
It is a very big deal. And, if you imagine, like you said, your dog running, they have to reach forward, right? And if you don't have that length on the back side of the arm and going into the chest and rib area there, if it's shortened, they can't get that proper reach. So again, it's setting them up for injury and gait abnormalities and so forth. Right. You know how I like my trivia, Cathy?
I know. Well, do tell. Go.
Yeah,
I got it.
This is something that I
can't
found
wait.
So fascinating when we studied for our CCRP. The triceps, you'd think, 3, try.
Yeah.
Well,
nope.
Indeed, in people, it is. But in dogs, there are 4 muscles that make up the triceps.
Tricky.
Yep. And conversely, there is only 1 bicep on the opposite side.
Right.
So it's not 2. So 5 total, but in the animal, 4 on the backside, 1 on the front side. And the reason for that is, as I explained earlier, they are quadruped. And so they really need to be solid and weight bearing on that front limb. Whereas we are bipedal and need to do a lot of lifting and throwing and things like that. So one of those tricep muscles is actually migrated around and acts as a elbow flexor so that we on our feet can lift with our arms.
Oh, that's interesting, Chris.
Yeah, I wonder why I know you knew that, but I bet our audience didn't.
Thank you. So let's talk about hand placement and so forth, so we can get those triceps stretched appropriately and without injuring our dogs. So can we talk a little bit about the hand placement for that?
Sure. So I like to cup the elbow, which is pointy. And, you can kind of bend your dog's limb a little bit to familiarize yourself with where it bends at the elbow joint. So, we have our toes, we have our wrist is the next joint that bends back and forth. And then as you go up the limb, the next one is the elbow, not the front knee, but actually the elbow.
The front knee, yeah.
Yeah, it's analogous to our arm. And then way up on their ribs is the shoulder. So you find that point on the back side, and I just kind of guide that point forward toward the dog's nose in an arc-like fashion. So it's going forward and up. And my other hand, I'll do one of 2 things. I'll either support the limb down by the wrist to kind of lift it and keep it in the plane of the dog, maybe parallel to the floor, if you will, if the dog is lying on its side. Or I'll place that hand on the shoulder blade and kind of rotate their shoulder blade up on their rib cage around at the same time that I'm guiding that elbow forward. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And then if you get it, I like that you're talking about how it has to stay level too. We really should keep it sort of parallel to the floor. We don't want to, stretch it in a weird position when they're abducted or maybe rotated in. It should stay in that plane.
Twisting.
No twisting. Cup the elbow. The other hand, I have placement underneath the wrist and I gently push from the elbow. So the pushing is the important thing. You don't want to grab from the wrist and pull it. You want to push from the elbow. And if you get that good stretch, that dog's foot should come almost out to, I would say should come out to the nose. Wouldn't you say? The front of the foot.
If the head isn't raised when they're on the ground, it should come to their nose if their neck is in a neutral position. Now, if you are gliding that elbow forward and the dog lifts its head back, again, parallel to the floor, but up, if you will, not toward the ceiling, but back away from that limb, that is a way for the dog to alleviate that stretch. So that's an indicator. Yeah. It's an indicator to you as the stretchor that, you've reached that point of discomfort and the dog is like, eh.
So if they pull their head back or they, arch
don't
back.
Keep pushing.
Yeah. Don't keep pushing. All right. That's good information, Chris. Thanks I didn't even think of that. Thanks.
Yeah. And, and I was going to say this too. I love stretching. I love the feeling of stretching. Oftentimes, I'm like, I'm going to go exercise and I get down on the floor and I just stretch. Whereas other people that I have worked with over the years, some of them find the feeling of stretching, that tension, very noxious. So stretching by and large is, good for 99%, but there may be, a pet or two out there that just isn't having
Maybe
it.
they don't.
Yeah.
So Chris, let's move on to the other group of muscles of the shoulder, the biceps. Can we talk a little bit about the hand placement and the stretching of the biceps?
Well, absolutely. So yes, as you said, going the opposite direction. So this time we're going to be bringing that front limb toward the belly, okay, back toward that back leg instead of up toward the nose. Yep. So in this case, I guess I do it one of two ways. I'll either get the dog's leg straight by pressing their elbow forward and kind of holding their wrist back. And then that straight leg, which is never perfectly straight, but that straightened leg, I'll bring the whole unit back toward their stomach. And again, when I feel tension, that's where I stop and hold. The ideal length would be getting that foot close to their knee on that back side. So I find dogs sometimes a little more fussy, with this one than the other direction. Probably less important for people to do. But if your dog doesn't like that methodology, then maybe try bringing the upper segment of the forelimb along their rib cage. So you're just kind of bending that elbow up toward their side, and then you stabilize the upper part of the leg against the ribs so that you're not pulling it back and hyperextending at the shoulder. Once you get that upper segment stabilized, then you open up, you extend from the elbow joint and try to get it as straight as possible. Again, stopping where you feel tension.
Right. And if you're doing the one where you're coming back and sort of flexing that elbow, I would say the elbow ends up being just about over the heart of the dog if you're doing that one.
Yes.
When you're coming back. It should be over, right anatomy-wise over the heart.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's how we find the heart, right? Doing CPR.
That's how we find the heart. Yeah. We bend the elbow, or we just, listen. With a stethoscope.
Well, you fancy vet techs with your stethoscopes.
Well, thanks, Chris. And maybe we should go on to the back limbs and talk about them.
Let's move on to the hind leg. So, Cathy, tell me, how would you, what do you start with? Do you start with the hamstrings or the quadriceps, or? I
usually start with the quadriceps. As a rehab geek, I have to tell you the quadriceps are my favorite groups of muscles. I don't know why. They just are, but there's a little information for you. But and I love it because it's a powerful muscle. It has the power. It propels you forward. It pushes you up the stairs and up the ramp and up the hill. And so it's a really important group of muscles, and it extends the stifle. Right. So it's the power movement.
What's the stifle?
Oh, the knee. I'm sorry. The stifle is the knee joint in the dog. It's the back. So we talked about the front, being the elbow like us, and the same thing with the dog in the back. The stifle is the knee joint. So I think that's what I like about it. It's a power muscle. It's a power couple.
Just like you and me, babe.
Just like me and you, it's a power couple. Right. So I think it's important to stretch that group of muscles because of that, because of the exertion that we're going to be using. If the dog starts to trot or run or go uphill or think about even going upstairs, you have to power yourself upstairs. Right. So I usually start with the quadriceps because they're my favorite. And my hand placement is very similar kind of to what we're talking about in the front, where I'm going to find the knee. Right. And it's easiest to find the knee if we just flex it a little bit, then you could cup it just like you cup the elbow. And then I'm going to put my other hand under the dog's ankle, or what we would call the dog's tarsus or hock joint. And then we're going to do the same thing. We're not going to take that. We're not going to grab that hock and pull. We're going to push from the stifle joint. We're going to keep that leg parallel to the ground, and we're going to gently extend. Again, we're kind of looking for that elasticy end feel, and we're going to let the dog relax a little bit. And then we're going to hold that stretch for about 30 seconds. Now, not every dog is going to do 30 seconds like we talked about. Sometimes you have to start with 5 and then move up to 10 and then move up to 15 and start building up to maybe that stretch. But then we can hold that stretch if the dog will allow for like 30 seconds.
So did you say where the quadriceps is located? I can't remember.
I did not say where the quadriceps. I guess I would say it would be what would probably be equivalent to the thigh, right?
The front of the thigh.
The front of the thigh. Exactly.
Yep.
So if you think about when you're pushing it, when you're stretching, you're extending those muscle fibers. we're pushing from the knee and extending.
Yep. Now, is the knee straightening as you go back, or does it stay bent, or?
Yes. I try to straighten it all out in parallel, all of it straight.
Okay. So you're allowing the knee, you're cupping the knee, but you're allowing the knee to straighten as you bring that whole leg back toward the pet's tail.
Right. Absolutely. And I'll find a lot of times with this particular muscle group that dogs will actually participate in the stretch. Does that happen to you too? Because it feels so good. I'll start the stretch and then dogs are like, oh, we're going to stretch. And they'll sort of go with me or finish the stretch. You know what,
Cathy? Especially if I do like a little tickle, like where their thigh meets their belly.
Yep.
You know, if you kind of rub their massage, then they'll like, and then they like stretch that leg back on their own and then I just capture that moment, right? I'm like, oh, great. You've got a head start. Let's keep going.
Okay. Fantastic. Yeah. You know what you're doing. So let's talk a little bit about the next group of muscles that we're going to be stretching in the dogs, the hamstrings. Now, the hamstrings are going to start right behind that sit bone that your dog has, right on that little bone, and they're going to extend all the way down to the stifle joint, which is the knee joint.
Right. And another fascinating fact, the hamstrings are so important in our quadruped, four-footed creatures, that there's actually a slip of hamstrings that goes all the way down to the ankle, to the calcaneus, the heel bone.
Right.
In people, that doesn't happen. Right. And so they're really important in function, co-contracting with those quadriceps that we've already mentioned to stabilize that hind leg.
Yeah. And think about the motion that we're talking about for dogs and what your dogs are doing in their daily lives that requires that motion. I mean, certainly running, you know, when they're bringing it forward like that, you've got to have that flexibility or you're going to be short strided, and that's going to change that could lead to an injury if those hamstrings aren't flexible.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. They have to be able to reach forward and have that flexibility, just like the triceps for the front limb.
Yeah. So my hand placement with this is I just changed it up a little bit, Chris. So I'll keep my hand, one of my hands under the knee, and then I have my hand under the hock, but I kind of cup that calcaneus, the part of the ankle. And then we're not going to pull. We're just going to gently push that leg. And then again, those toes of your dog should be facing your dog's nose. They should be going in that direction when you're stretching that limb. So that limb's coming up, I guess it would come across the body, right? And then the toes would be facing up towards your dog's head. And again, we're going to hold that for about 30 seconds.
Right. If you can get those back toes toward that elbow in the front, you know, when your dog is lying in a relaxed position, then I'd say that's ideal length. That's as much as you'd ever need.
Right.
And like the quadriceps, so it is true to its name, quads, 4 muscle groups there. The hamstrings also has 4 muscle bellies, 2 on the outside and 2 on the inside. And so these are both really, I mean, you look at a dog's thigh, right? A well-muscled athletic dog. I mean, those are some thick, jacked muscles. Right.
Right. I have a friend who has a Rhodesian Ridgeback, and sometimes I just stand back and admire the musculature on this dog and the power of this dog, you know.
And when you have a dog that's not super furry, you know, as they're kind of sleek coated, you know, think about like a greyhound and you can just see the cut, like the individual muscle groups and, you know, when they contract and relax and fasciculate and it's I know we're geeks like that. We would think.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So you want to move on to the inner thigh and why it's important to stretch that inner thigh.
Yeah, let's talk about stretching that inner thigh. It's really actually quite important. You know, we have a lot of hardwood floors here in New England, and we don't want our dogs to, you know, do the splits or get injured doing the splits. So it supports the leg. So I think it's really important to go over that stretch.
Yeah. So many dogs are using, I call them the squeezy muscles, right? To hold their legs together, especially as they age. They tend to splay more, have trouble keeping those legs in, or even electing to stand with a wider base of support to give them more stability. Yep. And so again, they're kind of holding and grabbing with those inner thigh muscles.
Right.
Dogs that have hip dysplasia, it gets really tight there. And
seniors.
Yes. And outside on ice and, you know, those sorts of, and so important. Go ahead.
It's important. So what I like to do, again, we're still in that same, maybe, we're still behind the dog, like we talked about. I like to sit behind the dog, and then I will put my hand under the knee, and I'll put my hand underneath the hock, and I'll lift it up. I like to, when I lift it up, I'm like, it's like your male dog peeing on the tree. I lift it up, peeing on the tree, lift it up, peeing on the tree. I'm lifting that. And again, I'm keeping the leg as straight and as level as I can, and I'm lifting it or pulling it away from the body.
Yeah. Away from midline up toward the ceiling.
Yeah.
And again, for those out there that don't know hock, it's the ankle joint or the tarsus. So there's 3 terms that are used for the ankle of the dog. So hock, tarsus, and ankle.
Yep. Yeah. And again, you're going to want to try for 30 seconds. You may have to work up to 30 seconds, right? Especially if it's tight there already. You may only be able to do maybe 10 seconds that first time. And then maybe the next time you try 15, and then maybe the next time you try 30. But again, our goal is to try and hold it and do it 3 times and hold for 30 seconds, or a goal of 30 seconds.
Yeah. If it's tight. Yeah. And the end goal in terms of motion is about 45 degrees, so if you take your dog's leg up and it's about, halfway from the floor to the ceiling, that halfway mark, that's about 45 degrees. Yeah. And that's what the experts say is normal extensibility there. Yeah. And sometimes I do it with the knee bent, and sometimes I do it with the knee straight, because you get slightly different muscle groups stretched depending on how straight that knee is. So
we're talking about, stretching the limbs. And I can't believe that we haven't mentioned this already, because we mention dog toes in almost every episode we've ever had, because we love dog toes.
We forgot the toe flexors.
I can't believe we forgot to talk about toe flexors, because it's our most favorite thing. We talk all the time about the feet and the toes and the importance of your dog's feet. And they are. We should treat our dogs' feet like one of their greatest assets. Dogs walk on their toes. So their toes are so important. They don't walk on the heel of their foot like you and I do. They walk on their toes. And if you think about the need for the flexibility of those weight-bearing toes, it's so vital. It's so important. It contributes to every single movement they make. So this is really one of your dog's greatest assets. And if you think about the toe and the toe flexors, now if the toe flexors were tight and the dog changed their position, to walk where it wasn't tight, think about how we walk on our heels, right? But what if we walked on the ball of our foot all day, like how that might feel just by changing that. So it's so important to have these toe flexors stretched. And it's so simple, Chris. What I do is I'll support above the foot. So right there at that ankle joint, the hock that we talked about. And I'll put my hand on the bottom of the dog's foot, and I'll just bring it up like the dog is in a stand position. So I've stretched the toes into its natural standing position, and maybe just push a little bit beyond that and hold that for 30 seconds. And it feels so good. And it's really, really important for your dog to have those toe flexors stretched out.
Right. And I think of 2 situations where those muscles of the feet tend to get tight. And one is orthopedically, when a dog has been favoring a leg and not fully weight bearing, because they're trying to protect that limb and allow it to heal. So they will naturally be up on their toes a little bit more, either non-weight bearing, where they're carrying their leg up off the ground, or certainly shifted off of it. And what happens is that the muscle group on the bottom side or back side of that foot is inherently tighter than the muscle on the top side or top of the foot. And so there's an imbalance there, which will pull the dog's toes into kind of a clawed position.
Right.
And by weight bearing, the toes then are brought up into extension, as you were describing, in that standing position. And they also splay a little bit. They spread out.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a clue for people if they're trying to figure out like which leg might be involved with an injury or something. If the foot looks narrower, they're not putting as much weight on that foot. If the foot is wider and more splayed, they're weight bearing more. But yeah, so in addition to stretching them up, you might work your fingers between the toes too and kind of spread them out and make sure they're not getting tight that way. The other situation where I think that the dog's toe flexors get tight is with neurological impairment.
Oh, yeah.
One of the first things that happens when maybe the messages aren't getting through fully or accurately from the brain all the way back to those back feet, especially, that's a long ways, right? For nerve messages to travel. And so one of the first signs that we'll see is, maybe like a dragging of the foot or a knuckling where those toes again kind of fold over. And some dogs will even stand on the top of their foot, and it looks awful. But doesn't seem to be that painful in these cases. But, if they keep perpetuating that position and not balancing it out, or we balancing it out for them and going the other way, it gets so tight that they can't extend their toes.
Right. Yeah.
And every time
that's problematic. That's really problematic.
Yes. And every time they try to, in either case, orthopedically or neurologically, if those toe flexors are tight, they're getting a negative message, if you will, like, ow, every time I try to step fully on that leg, I get, a zinger. And this happens to people. I mean, think about it like, hopefully women have learned their lesson and aren't wearing as high heeled shoes as we used to. But that puts our heels up off the ground in a high heeled shoe. And then we go barefooted or wear a tennis shoe and our heels suddenly brought down. That puts a lot of stretch on the calf and results in things like plantar fasciitis. So I know a lot of people out there have had plantar fasciitis, and it's excruciating. And so that's kind of an analogy we might use, for our pet in this case. Another example, speaking to the importance of stretching with people and what we can relate to is, a lot of us are sitting so much during the day with our knees bent and our hips bent, in that 90-90 position. And then when we go to stand up, sometimes we'll get like a tug in our hamstrings. Or it'll cause our back, our pelvis to tilt, or we might feel like a stretch on the front of our hip. And that's from, not counteracting that prolonged position that we may be in throughout the day at our desk or watching TV.
Yeah.
So,
and I think that, we always go over this just about every podcast we have about buy-in with the dog. But the thing I want to really stress too is that none of this has to be forced, right? It doesn't have to be forced. We don't have to lay our dogs down and stretch them out. That's not what I'm looking for. That's not what we're looking for. We want the dog to have buy-in. We want to have the dog. I don't want to do something. I want the dog to participate in this action as well, right? So I'm never going to force my dog to lay down and then force my dog to stretch and then force my dog to get a back leg stretch. So that you have to find the space that's good for your dog, the time. You can't be rushed or stressed. Your dog's an emotional barometer. They'll know that. And get your dog used to touch. Sometimes it starts there, getting used to the dog, just touching them in those areas and then progressing from there. So it doesn't have to be a forceful situation.
A pet peeve of mine is, when you have people, I mean, even just a simple sit command, right?
Right.
And they're like, come on, sit. I told you to sit, and we need to be just so much more, inviting, if you will. So you're inviting your dog to sit. So, I'll be like, Baxter, sit, will you sit, please? And then I'm like, good boy. And again, praising. So same thing goes with the stretching. You have them lay down. Good job. Way to lay down, and it just, again, everything that they do that's in the right direction for what you want and that end goal, give them that positive, verbal reinforcement, which brings me to think about.
Good job. That's the best stretching I've ever seen.
And it gets me thinking about the use of treats too. Sometimes we do want to positively reinforce when they're doing the right thing, but with anything that we do passively, we have to be a little bit careful, because if your dogs are nutty for treats like mine are, they won't relax. They're tensing up and they're trying to get that treat. And even if I put them behind my back, they know they're there and they won't cooperate.
Right.
But I might use a treat to get them to lie down and then, get them calm and what have you. And then that's it. And then when we're done with the stretching routine, then I'm like, oh, big party. And then, give them 3 or 4 treats for participating voluntarily, if you will, with me.
Yeah. And what I'll do with them just at the end is I tell my dog it's the greatest thing I've ever seen, which is in part of his, narcissism, probably because everything he does, I tell him it's great. But then I throw the treats in like a little scatter. So he gets up and he gets to forage and move a little bit after the stretching.
Right. Yeah. Which also we know from research that utilizing the motion afforded by the increased flexibility retains that increased length in those tissues better. So in other words, like you wouldn't want to stretch your dog before bedtime and then they curl up in a little ball in their bed. You're not going to gain a lot.
Yeah, right.
You want to stretch when they're then going to go out and use those muscles, use those tissues, open those joints up to help retain that newfound flexibility.
Mm-hmm. So, Chris, before we wrap up, why don't we leave the audience with 3 active stretches that they can do with their healthy dog?
Sure. Yeah. And as I mentioned before, some dogs just, may not be amenable to lying on their side and receiving a passive stretch, but we can certainly do active stretches. So this is, promoting them doing the movement on their own. And I always use treats or cookies because those are my friends to facilitate this process. So one of my favorites is the cookie stretch, cookie being the treat in your hand. I'm behind the dog. And I will start with the treat at their snout. They know it's there. I slowly bring it around back toward their hip or as far as they can go. I try to hold a little bit, not give them that treat right away. And that certainly is working on stretching their trunk. So, head, mid back, low back, and they have to really work on balance too. Have to put a little pressure on that opposite hip because sometimes they'll just turn around right into you. And so you want to hold them in place at their rear end. And then you do the same thing on the opposite side. We always want to be balanced. If you want to mix it up, you could not just go to the hip. You could also put the cookie at their knee, down at their ankle or toes. So, just be creative with it, but always do the same on the right and left side. And as we mentioned earlier, you might notice that your dog goes farther or more easily or more readily to one side or the other. Make note of that. Is there a problem? Does it improve? Do we get symmetry over time?
Right.
Another stretch that I like to promote is the downward dog. So your pet's facing you. I have the cookie in my hand, and I'll rather quickly dive that cookie down between their front legs toward the floor. And sometimes they'll back up. Sometimes, they might lie down or just bend over for it. But we really want them to keep their rear end in the air and extend that back and reach those front legs forward as they go for that cookie via their mouth that's between their front legs. It can be a little tricky, but something to work on. Even if
it looks like a play bow, right?
Play bow. Yeah, exactly.
Like a play bow. Yep.
Yeah, good description. And, and I was going to say too, that even if you don't succeed, doing these things is still fun. You're making your dog think.
Yeah.
And they're like, what do they want from me? And, and again, if you can go online and probably, figure out find a tutorial and how to teach your dog these things. And then kind of going the opposite direction would be almost facilitating an upward dog. So if we block our pet's rear legs by putting our arm on their thighs, kind of under their belly, but not lifting up. And then with your opposite hand, stretching your dog forward, they'll open up those hips and kind of, reach in that opposite direction. So instead of their head being down now on the ground, they're reaching up and forward and really elongating that spine and opening up their hips.
Yeah. Nice one.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. That was really great information. And I'm going to have very shortly a video tutorial up on our YouTube channel. So we will put that link in our show notes so that you can go there and see how we can stretch our dogs appropriately.
Yes, a picture's worth 1,000 words, as we all know. And I know it's a little bit hard to follow when we're describing these things without, pictures or video going along with it. But Cathy and I, again, utilized our friend Libby. She was a great model. She was a little exuberant that day. So it's a real life scenario, if you will. And but we go through the stretching in detail on the YouTube. So please look at that. I think that you'll find it very beneficial.
Me too. All right, Chris. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed our show. Follow us on Facebook or on Instagram at Petability Podcast.
For more information about Cathy's books and living with blind dogs, please go to enableyourpet.com. Thank you, and please tune in next time.